Let's take a look at labor relations in public service. Public employee unions are under fire as governments at all levels seek to cope with limited resources and budget restrictions. They act as protectors, defending employees' rights and interests, partners with pro-labor stakeholders, and punishers against those perceived to be anti-labor. These three roles help explain union behavior both internally and externally. The final quarter of the 20th century was a time of economic flux and uncertainty, energy crises, stagflation, and the beginnings of the demise of the labor movement during the 1970s, global competition and deindustrialization in the 1980s, and the new economy of the 1990s. What emerged through programs of deregulation and privatization were doctrines and policies advocating reliance on the market to allocate society's resources. The approach saw its fullest explanation in the initial decade of the new millennium, as markets were regarded as good, efficient, nonpartisan, and objective. Public provision of goods and services was seen as an obstacle to economic development, as neoliberalism became the dominant ideology through which economic activity was to be understood. The rise and decline of unions in contemporary history is well documented. Viewed as the champion of the underdog, organized labor was influential in many policy debates, like trade, taxes, fair labor standards, social security, civil rights, public education, healthcare, equal pay for women, and workplace safety. Its gains went well beyond the on-the-job concerns, transforming the lives of all Americans and helping build the middle class. During the next 30 years, labor's clout diminished as the efforts of the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act and the 1959 Landrum-Griffith Act became manifest. The union movement, in fact, has been on the defensive to protect fair labor standards established during the New Deal, as pay and benefits have largely plateaued during the past 30 years. A victim of its earlier success in improving compensation and working conditions, organized labor came to be viewed as just another special interest, unsuited to a changing economy and unjustly protective of marginal employees. In the public arena, after a dramatic rise in the 1960s and 1970s, union membership flattened in the 1980s and has remained stagnant due to chronic fiscal stress, limited government growth, privatization, and taxpayer hostility. Important facets of the labor management relations include its evolution, legal basis, and collective bargaining procedures. Most public employees and managers have definite opinions about unions, some favorable and some unfavorable. On the positive side, employees dissatisfied with their jobs or working conditions might have favorable views of unions. Unions might protect vulnerable workers and protect them against arbitrary and capricious actions of their employers. Workers may also think union membership can amplify their voices in the workplace and increase their influence with management. Vigilant unions can help keep management honest and ensure fair dealings with personnel. Collective action, especially in the labor-intensive public sector, sometimes yields results unattainable through concerted individual activities. Workers who have negative views of unions might focus on such aspects as dues, unresponsive labor leaders, unflattering stereotypes associated with unions, and questionable benefits. Others oppose union organizing efforts, fearing that rigid, binding labor contracts alter or erode managerial rights and decrease administrative discretion and flexibility. Managers may view unions as introducing conflict, distraction, and disruption into the workplace, thus inhibiting cooperative working relationships. Also, unions may be seen to complicate or delay policy implementation. Some managers, especially those in right-to-work states where mandatory union membership is outlawed, believe that current organizational policies and procedures are fair to employees. Such managers believe that there's no need for a meet and confer right, like laws requiring agency heads to discuss but not to settle grievances, or bargaining rights that force them to work with unions on employment matters. Those opposed to unions often combine their criticisms with proposals to privatize public services. Some officials think that union organizing efforts result from management's unfair treatment of employees. This is the view taken by the AFL-CIO, which has identified 5 factors that reduce the chances for union organizing. 1. Bosses not taking advantage of employees. 2. Employee pride in work. 3. Agency records of good performance by employees. 4. Avoidance of favoritism. And 5th, good supervisor-subordinate relations. Employers with positive attitudes towards unions see them as contributing to a form of workplace democracy, enabling labor and management to join in improving conditions of employment. Managers and employees can have either positive or negative perceptions about each other. In some cases, this is most evident in relations between the chief executive officer and his or her union leader counterpart. It's not surprising, then, that employees and managers react differently to unions. Working in a unionized environment prods both parties to consider how their jobs are affected by the presence of organized labor. Unions clearly raise contentious issues among key stakeholders. Overall, organized labor's share of the workforce dropped from 14.5% in 1996 to 11.3% in 2013, down considerably from 1954 when unions represented 35% of the nation's workers. Still, in 2013, public sector workers were nearly 5 times more likely than private sector employees to be union members. It's not yet known whether this gap will close. The proportion of union membership in the public and private spheres in 1994 was 38.7% versus 10.8% respectively. In 2013, it was 35.3% versus 6.7%. There are several reasons for the drop in private sector union membership. While there's been a fairly steady decline in union membership over the past several decades, primarily in the private sector, there are some signs that organized labor is undergoing reinvention. This is occurring in part through a so-called alt-labor groups, workers' associations, and work centers. The rise in public area union membership has occurred in the past 5 decades, with the largest growth spurt in the 1960s and 1970s, moderate growth in the 80s, and flat growth in the 90s and 2000s. The following are some of the reasons for substantial growth in public sector union membership. Not only do membership trends vary between the two sectors, but labor law also varies. Although public sector relations are adapted from a business model, there are significant differences between the sectors. A bewildering array of federal, state, and local laws, regulations, court decisions, ordinances, and attorneys' general opinions shape governmental labor management relations. In recent years, there's been a decrease in work stoppages or strikes and an increase in the use of third-party mediators. Government structure, legal and economic factors, and cultural considerations all influence labor management relations.